G'day everyone and welcome to video 4.2.2 for the Legal Studies guy. Our quote to start today, pretty straightforward one. The harder I work, the luckier I get. A bit of a theme coming through and same theme that's with, I guess, all the quotes that have been throughout the year. Just around putting that work in. You don't know how well you could go. You don't know what you're potentially missing out on until you put that effort in. And ultimately, the more effort you put in, the more you'll get out of it, the more opportunities that you'll get, and ultimately, the more chance you'll get to say, "Oh, I just got lucky." So 4.2.2 today. Um, last, last video we looked at reasons for law reform, and now we're extending into how you might influence law reform. So if you are an individual or a group up here, how might you so say you have a reason for wanting to change the law, such as you've noticed this change in technology and you don't think the law is kept up, or you and a group of people that you are connected to in some way believe that the values of society have changed and you want Parliament to change the law. Well, how can you influence Parliament? And there's some specific ways we need to learn about here, being petitions, demonstrations, and the use of the courts. We're going to be able to discuss those means at the end. So that's a key word there, means by which we influence law reform. So our essential question is, how can you influence law reform? So, study design lists three clear ways: petitions, one; demonstrations, two; and use of the courts, three. So they're the three that we'll look at. Next slide, we're also going to look at the role of the media in influencing law reform, which is something also that will come up in these slides and something that individuals and groups can use in a way, but the media does exist as a bit of a separate entity. So, starting with petitions. What are petitions? Petitions are something that you might see in your local area at times. Petitions are something that you might even see in your school. And petitions are when we basically get everyone who agrees with a change to sign something indicating that they support it. So you might, petition your school leadership around looking for a change of uniform, perhaps, and all of the students who agree would sign that bit of paper. Or you might petition for the addition of a Year 12 common room if your school doesn't have one. And again, everyone who agrees might sign it, probably all the Year 11 and 12 students. In terms of influencing law reform, so petitions that go to Parliament, we want to really use this clear language here to describe what they are. So petitions are written specific requests for change to a law, or they could be requests to not change something. But generally speaking, a petition is clearly calling for an action from Parliament, and we'll look at the rules on petitions in the House of Representatives here, and we'll go over this in a bit more detail in a moment. But really clearly, a petition must contain a request for action. So they are a specific written request for change signed by those who support it. So it has to request some kind of action, and it has to be written and presented. Now, most petitions these days are submitted as e-petitions, which means they're obviously done online, as opposed to, you going around, or as they used to be done. I'm a bit tired over here. As they used to be done, people carrying around bits of paper or standing on street corners asking for signatures. These days, they're mostly done online as e-petitions. Petitions can be submitted to both houses of Parliament, both Commonwealth and Victoria, but they're more commonly submitted to the lower house. Indeed, if you want to submit a petition to the Senate, for example, that has to be a written petition, or it could be an online petition that you print out. And then you have to find a member and hope the member will present it for you, as opposed to the Victorian Parliament, both upper and lower house, but also the House of Reps that have like an online system for petitions to make it easier. In Victoria, You have to have your petition sponsored by a member of parliament. So you can start a petition on the petitions website, which I've got a link to later on. But before that petition can ever actually be presented in Parliament, you have to get a member of Parliament to sponsor it, so to say that they support it, that they're willing to present it in Parliament on your behalf. Um, in the Commonwealth Parliament and the House of Representatives, that's done by a committee. So the Petitions Committee, which is a group of parliamentarians who meet, um, and they will review all the petitions that have gone up and closed online, and effectively then present these to the Parliament. Um, Really importantly with petitions is that they can be referred to the relevant minister for response. Now, in the House of Reps, that's a petition with 50 or more signatures. So if you can get a petition with 50 or more people to sign it, and if you get a chance later on to have a look at some of the petitions on the Commonwealth e-petition site, you'll understand that not all of them are getting 50 signatures, that's for sure. A lot of them are poorly worded and have bad grammar and spelling, etc. Petitions are clearly boring based on my yawning. But if you can get 50 or more signatures, the House of Reps Petitions Committee will refer that to the relevant minister, and the minister is meant to respond in writing to the House of Reps within 90 days about whether they're going to act on that petition or not. Now, a lot of petitions don't get many signatures, but we do have examples over time of petitions that have got tens of thousands, if not more, signatures. So they can be uh, a way to attract large public interest and therefore clearly indicate to Parliament that change is needed. And there are other advantages, obviously, that they go directly to Parliament. So they're not on the periphery where we hope politicians see them. They get sent directly to politicians. But the disadvantage of petitions is that Parliament has no obligation to act. There's no need to follow through on a petition, no matter how many signatures it has. Therefore, they might be considered not an effective way of influencing lawful. Another disadvantage is that they're not as publicly visible as other methods. They're kind of hidden on the petitions website. I'm sure many of you have never accessed the petitions website. Potentially none of you watching for the first time would have ever looked at the petitions website. Therefore, petitions not very visible, particularly in comparison to a protest. Look, these are the rules on petitions for the House of Reps. You can have a look through these if you want. They're just here to sort of help you, you know, understand what exactly a petition is. As I said, it's something that contains a clear request for action from the House. They've got to be in English. They can't promote illegal acts. Uh, Corporations can uh, make petitions, but generally they come from individuals. There's no attachments to them. There's 250 word limit, so they're pretty short, snappy written requests for a specific change. In terms of rules for paper petitions, e-petitions, you need to put your full name and address on it. They're online for 4 weeks to be signed. Members of Parliament are not allowed to sign e-petitions. Once they're finished, they are electronically submitted to the standing committee. They'll check that each petition complies, and then they'll be presented to Parliament by the chair of that committee. All done pretty briefly, and they can be referred after a petition is presented. It can be referred to the minister responsible for the administration of that matter, to then respond. And actions of the House here, effectively it goes enhanced. They're received. That's effectively it. There can be debate, but there isn't usually. So, petitions. Done. Demonstrations, a little bit more straightforward in the sense of we generally should know what a demonstration is. A demonstration is also known as a protest. And a protest is when a group of individuals, publicly protests. Demonstrations are public shows of desire for law reform. So we're looking for a change in the law. Australia has a really long and proud history of demonstrations. We love demonstrations. We're a big country of demonstrators. I'm sure some of you have potentially been to demonstrations before. And the key thing about them is they're generally disruptive in nature. So they attract media attention. The media is like, oh my God, look at this thing that's happening in these streets, or all these people that have turned up to Parliament. And we're hoping that as a result of all of this, politicians will take notice. And politicians will take notice from the sense of, oh, look at all these people. I might want to do something because the people might then vote for me. So really closely linked to this concept of representative government. Um, as we said in the details part, if they get media attention, and the larger the protest is, the better. They are significantly more likely to influence law reform. They also serve an educative function, so protests can help people in the community understand an issue, become aware of an issue, and the more people that are aware, the more people that might support it. Therefore, representative nature of Parliament. Again, we should get a change. Problem is, petitions can be disruptive and violent. Demonstrations can be disruptive and violent. Negative media attention can come from it. There was a protest a couple of years ago where a group of people blocked the Westgate Freeway, for example. Incredibly disruptive, ruins people's days who are stuck in traffic then who are trying to get to work. These people might actually be less likely to agree with the change, as opposed to more likely, which is what we're generally hoping from a protest. Also, they can be time consuming and difficult to organise. I'm sure maybe some of you have tried to organise a protest before. Very challenging to try and get all those logistics right and actually get people to turn up. So, not as easy to organise as a petition. But definitely more, I would say, probably more easy to organise than this third means by which individuals or groups can influence law reform, which is using the courts. And that's when we bring a case to court to seek a new interpretation of the law. Now, I'll jump straight to the disadvantages here because this builds off stuff we've done previously with the courts. It's expensive and time consuming to bring a case, and you need to have standing. So really, really clear. Um, we know the disadvantages of trying to use the courts to change the law because we did that in 4.1. But we know the benefits of it, which are that the decisions come into force immediately, and decisions can be made on law alone. All of a sudden, we remove this whole idea of politicians having to do it. We remove the political pressures of the representative nature. Courts can just make a decision on the case in front of them. And they're going to do this through either statutory interpretation or common law precedent. Um, Also, court cases can attract that large amount of public attention. If there's issues with the law or something or an interpretation, Parliament might then be able to act on it. So they can be influential towards Parliament, particularly through statements from the courts in obiter statements in judgments, etc. Our key skill here is discuss the means by which individuals can influence or groups can influence law reform. So we know discuss is an exchange of opinions. AKA, if we're going to discuss them, we need to be talking about how good they are or whether they're good or not at their job. And for that, I've just got basically the things that came off the slides before. These are why they are effective, but these are why they might not be. Things like protests, well, there can be counter protests at the same time. These counter protests can actually raise or present competing ideas, which might be more compelling to people, but also can increase the chance of violence, negative media attention, etc., which is actually bad for the change. Similarly, e-petitions, there's large numbers of petitions these days. Your petition might get lost or, not publicly visible, but we know that petitions go directly to Parliament, so there's strengths there. The other part of this skill is that we need to be able to use examples. This can both mean section B, but also we probably do need to learn an example or two for each of them. So this is where I would encourage you very much, because I've got some sample answers here that have some older cases. I would encourage you very much to be yeah, looking at different media sources here, trying to read newspapers, online news, etc., to keep an eye out for things like, petitions. Keep an eye out particularly for things like protests or prominent court cases that you might then be able to use in an answer on an exam. Say if you got a question like this, using an example, explain how individuals can influence law reform using, say, the courts, demonstrations, or petitions. And as I said, here's 3 sample answers. I want to note that the key language from the question was using the example, not explain with an example, but use the example to explain. So, an example of individuals influencing law reform through the courts, for starters, is Mabo. And then we do a little explanation of what the means is, hey, you can bring a case, seek a new interpretation. This happened in the Mabo case where Mabo was seeking to overturn terra nullius. The decision also influenced Parliament to codify. So, really using the example to then show how this method works. Same deal here with petitions. This was a petition in 2018 around GST being charged on tampons, pads, women's sanitary items. Um, Individuals in that case, a petition was presented. Over 100,000 people signed it, looking for the GST to be removed from those products. This because it had more than 50 signatures, just a solid 99,950 more than needed. It went to the relevant minister, and as actually in 2019 that the law was changed and this GST was removed on women's sanitary products. Um, so, yeah, the large show of public interest and agreement with this change may have led Parliament to change the law in order to better represent the people. And that is the same with protests. It's all about shows of public support. So, this is what you want to be putting in an answer. Shows of public support can lead Parliament seeking to reform the law in order to represent the community. And the example I have in this answer is a set of protests from about, we're talking like 8 or 9 years ago now, so quite old. I mean, you could definitely find more relevant recent protests, and I encourage you to. But these ones are called the Let Them Stay protests, and they were protests around or against the holding of immigrants in offshore detention centres, so like Nauru, Manus Island, etc. Um, the idea being let them stay in Australia. But again, focusing on this public show of support for a change may influence Parliament to reform the law in order to better represent the community. There are those effective, not effectives again. Some good links here. I thoroughly recommend you go and look at the petitions websites to see the different petitions that are up there at the moment. If you're 18, you might even be able to sign one. Here's an article on Let Them Stay in the protests and just a little bit more about the Marbo case. Ultimately, if someone comes up to you tomorrow and says, hey, I understand now why the law needs to change, I understand why the law needs to be fluid, we talked about this, but now for a real bee in my bonnet, I want to change this, I want to influence, I want to make a change in the law, you'll be able to say to them, yeah, I've got your back, I know exactly how you can do that. You can start a petition. Or, hey, maybe we can organise a protest, or maybe we can talk to a lawyer or see if there's a way that we can go through the courts to do this. You should now hopefully know exactly how you can influence law reform. As always, feel free to post feedback below, but